Welcome, everybody. Awesome. Welcome. We have our live stream set, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Audrey Gomez. I am the Education Director for C4 Atlanta. We are the host for this 2020 Civic Arts Advocacy Summit. Just a note that we are live streaming through Facebook, so if you go to our Facebook event, you can share that on other pages if you'd like, or you can share it from the C4 page. We're live streaming to both of them. On this, also supporting this program today with me is Naja Ali, who is C4 Atlanta's member services manager, and we are happy to introduce Ashley Oliver and Elena Intieri. Sorry, Elena. I'm a little nervous. From the YWCA of Greater Atlanta to talk about policy tracking and working with legislators. They are the leaders of the Georgia Women's Policy Institute and have a background in policy and policy tracking at the state level. And I hope they'll share a little bit more about what they do at YWCA, because it is really amazing, their advocacy program. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them to introduce themselves and get started.
Thank you, Audrey. Like Audrey said, I am Elena Intrieri. I'm the Director of Advocacy and Social Justice at the YWCA of Greater Atlanta. At the YWCA, we run as Audrey said, what we think is a really great program called the Georgia Women's Policy Institute. It is a program that recruits and trains women in policy advocacy at the state level in Georgia. We are currently running 2 cohorts who will work on policy projects at the state capitol during the upcoming legislative session. The program has been going for about 9 years. We encourage you to visit our website at ywcaatlanta.org to get more information about the program if you're interested in finding out more.
Hi everyone, I'm Ashley Oliver. I'm a program manager for the Georgia Women's Policy Institute. I run a cohort that recruits women from all over the state and focuses on reproductive justice advocacy. I'm newer to the role. I just started at the beginning of the year, and before that I was more of a volunteer advocate. So I'm excited to be sharing this information as someone who knows what it's like to be doing it as your side hustle. I'll call it that because it takes a lot of time. So I'm excited to share this with y'all today. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. If that's okay with Audrey, Elena. Good.
I think so.
All right, so as we mentioned, we're with the YWCA of Greater Atlanta. Our mission is eliminating racism and empowering women. We are an affiliate of the larger USA organization that is the largest national women's organization, originally founded in 1902 with a social justice lens for advocacy. The Y offers a range of different programs, but advocacy is definitely a focus for them. We already went through introduction, so I'm just going to go ahead and skip that. This is a little bit about what we'll be covering today. We're going to go over the basics of policy making, tracking state level legislation, tracking legislation at the local level, which is city and county, and then tracking state level regulatory actions. So we'll go over a little bit what all those things mean as we move along. And if anyone has any questions while we're going through the slides, feel free to drop them in the chat, and either Elena or Audrey will just holler them out to me because I cannot see the chat while I'm sharing. We would love to get to know who's in the room today as well. So if you wouldn't mind just dropping your name, if you're with an organization, what organization you're with in the chat, and what you hope to get from today. So hopefully if these slides don't answer your questions, we'll have some time to get you some answers on what you're looking for getting out of today. So So I'll give you all just a moment to go ahead and start doing that in the chat, and then we will get started. All right, what is public policy? I think this quote sums it up best for the mission of the Y and a lot of nonprofit organizations. This is from Marcia Abner, the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits. And this says, public policy is the set of decisions that we make as a society about how we will care for one another, our communities, and the land. Citizens have a right to be involved in public policy decisions. And I think this is even more relevant today when we're thinking about all of the advocacy that goes around voting and get out the vote and who are your leaders. It's not enough to just vote for leaders that have similar policy ideas that you have, but you have to continue your action by advocating for policies that align with the world that you want to live in and how you believe people should be treated. There are two other definitions of policy that are often used. Policy can also be described as a law, a regulation, procedure, administrative action, incentive, or voluntary practice of governments and other institutions, as well as formal decisions made by policymakers, which is aimed at a group of people within a setting. So those are more technical definitions of what policymaking is, but at the end of the day, it's really what sets the tone for the communities that we live in. It's important to engage in policy because it addresses system-wide root causes of a problem. So there's a lot of talk about systematic racism and different things like that. And you need to be able to address the actual issue with policy that sets in rules and regulations that can actually start to change and affect those systematic issues. It can have cost-effective, wide-reaching impact, so it can save taxpayers money, it can save county money, it can save the state's money, and then also it allocates resources. It determines priorities and protects rights. So I think especially important, likely to a group like this, is the money getting resourced for arts and things that are important to your community? Is there somebody advocating to make sure that it's being thought of when the budget is implemented? When we think of policy, there's three types. So there's laws or legislation, which are done by legislative bodies, either at the federal, state, or local level. There's regulations, which are rules created by government agencies. So that's also state and federal with regulatory authority to implement them. And then there's organizational policy. So these are internal rules voluntarily established with a public agency or private organization. So these are things like, I'm sure that C4 has policies that they set in place that y'all as a community decided you wanted to live by and move by as an organization. Once you know the different types of policy, it's important to know who is in charge of those type of policy, because if you go to the wrong person for a certain policy, they're just they're gonna look at you like you're crazy. It's like going to Burger King to complain about McDonald's fries. They're just gonna look at you like, okay. So if you're thinking about laws or legislation, that's gonna be members of Congress. It's gonna be the state legislator. It's gonna be city council members. If you're thinking about a regulation policy, it's gonna be the director of a federal or state department or agency. And if you're thinking about organizational policy, it's going to be the board members, it's going to be the CEO or stakeholders within that organization that are going to set that policy. So it's really important when you're thinking about the policy and how you want to advocate for it, where you advocate it, and who you need to speak to help advocate for that. Elena, are we good on questions so far? Okay, next we're going to talk about the 5 stages of policy change. So this is sort of a never-ending loop, and sometimes you may find yourself plopped in at any particular point, but The 5 steps are analyzing the problem, propose a policy solution, influence the policy change process, then you need to monitor the implementation of the policy, and then evaluate the impact. And I would argue that 4 and 5 can be some of the most important, because if you're making change but it's not being implemented and there's no actual impact, then did you really at the end of the day make a change? So we have an example here of something that the GWPI, the Georgia Women's Policy Institute cohort, worked on. Here, the local news station, they identified a problem. There were thousands of untested rape kits in the state of Georgia, some going back as far as 1970. And these untested rape kits were victims that were never seeing justice because their rape kit was just stuck in this backlog. After researching the problem, they found the reason that these were not getting tested is because there wasn't enough staff or budget to hire the staff to test the rape kits. So Representative Holcomb, he identified that this was the problem. The testing places needed funds to be able to test the rape kits. So he introduced a bill, House Bill 827, called the Pursuing Justice for Rape Victims Act, which would allocate funds to those labs to be able to have the personnel to go through the testing. So this went through a full legislative session and it did pass. However, I skipped this step. And in the meantime, the reason that it passed is because folks were advocating for it. So they were doing op-eds for the newspaper. They were going down to the Capitol. They were calling their legislators and advocating for this bill and explaining to them why it was important for it to pass, because it's just uncalled for those rape kits to be sitting there and not be tested and have those victims be waiting for that long to see some form of justice. As I mentioned, these were some of the ways that they advocated for the bill. They collaborated with stakeholders, they educated their legislators, they did meetings with the public, letting them know why it's important that those kits get tested and what it means that they were just sitting there. They testified in front of committees, again, just explaining the importance of getting the test processed. And then they held lobby days to activate the public to also support the legislation. Once it passed, they began to monitor the implementation of the bill, and they noticed that cops never picked up the 211 rape kits from one of the health centers. So this is, as I mentioned earlier, an important part, because the work doesn't stop once the bill passes. Because although the legislation went into effect, if no one's monitoring to make sure they actually enact what went into effect, then the problem never gets fixed. So in this case, advocates stayed on it. They kept monitoring it. They realized that, hey, this center, they're not picking up the rape kits. So they went back and they held them accountable and made sure that all the rape kits were picked up and tested. And then you'll see here, the impact was that they identified somebody who was responsible for the sexual assault of at least 15 girls and women, from making sure that all those kits were tested. So they made sure it was done, and then they followed the result of what happened after it was done. Still good on questions, Elena, before we go into the next part? Okay, so we talked about advocating for the bill, but now we're going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to actually watch the physical bill go through the General Assembly, and not just talking about the specific issue of that you're advocating for. So the Georgia General Assembly has 236 legislators, 56 senators, 180 representatives, and during the 2018-2019 legislative session, 31% of legislators were women, And currently, the Republicans hold the majority party in both the State House, the Senate, and the governor's office. And that's important to note, even on a nonpartisan level, because it's going to really identify how legislation moves through the Georgia General Assembly. And I think another important thing to note is that the Georgia General Assembly, it's a 2-year session, and then every 2 years, all legislation is erased from the table and all legislators are up for re-election. So that also really affects how policy is done here in Georgia. So the Georgia General Assembly session, it starts the second Monday of every January. They meet for 40 non-consecutive days. The non-consecutive days is very important because they can call recess whenever they feel necessary. That actually happened this year. For COVID, they had to call a recess until they could assess the situation and decide when it was safe for legislators to go back into the Capitol and take up votes and issues. The last day, Sine Die, is in late March, early April. Oops. And then again, the legislators they work all year long, but they're only working on passing legislation during those 40 non-consecutive days. And part of the reason for that is because when legislators are in session, they are not able to do any fundraising or campaign related activities involving any type of funds or meeting with certain people, just to make sure that everything is ethically appropriate. Okay, so there's going to be 2 people that represent you in the Georgia General Assembly. You're going to have a House representative and a state Senate representative. This looks like DeKalb County. I'm not sure, Elena, if these are your 2 representatives, but this is Senator Elena Parent and Representative Renita Shannon. So when you look up who represents you, you're going to be able to identify what party they belong to, your district, and you'll be able to see what committees they sit on, as well as how to reach out to them here with their email address, and usually their assistant will also be on there, which is an important secret tip. To actually get a hold of them, you should copy their assistant on there because you'll have a better luck of getting a hold of your representative. To be able to get to this point, to find out who represents you, you're going to want to go to openstates.org, type in your address, and it'll pull up both your state senator and your House representative. And then it'll lead you, then you can go to house.georgia.gov, and you can look up to find more information on what they do in the General Assembly. Okay, once you know who represents you, it's important to know how in Georgia a bill becomes a law. A little basics. So a bill starts with an idea or a concept that you can bring to your legislator. You can also start by going to an organization that works in the same space that you're thinking, that you're advocating for. So you could say, hey, I had this idea about this arts program, and I want to know, what do you think and what would it look like to enact this? And you could go with a general idea to your legislator, or you could just go straight to your legislator and say, hey, I don't know how this could happen, but this is what I would like to see happen. Then the legislator becomes the bill sponsor, so the champion of the bill, and they take this idea to legislative council, who writes the bill to make sure that it falls in line with Georgia laws and code. And then once the legalese of the bill is taken care of, it is then introduced either on the House or the Senate, depending on who your sponsor is. It will align with whichever chamber they're in. This is also a quick infographic of how the bill moves through the legislature. So as we talked about, the bill is brought to Legislative Council and then filed. Once it's filed, depending on which chamber it's in, and I actually think that this is a little easier to read. This is a breakdown of the Senate and the House. So you start with an idea, you get a sponsor, you go to Legislative Council, they draft it up, and then it goes to first reading, which literally just means the clerk or the secretary of the Senate read what the bill is and what it does on the floor of the chamber to the legislators. And then as soon as it's gone through first reading, either the lieutenant governor or the speaker of the House will assign it to a committee. The committee, where it is assigned, is based off what the speaker decides. Typically, it goes into a committee that aligns with what the bill is focused around, but sometimes there can be some change in that. Then it sits in the committee until the committee chair calls for a hearing, if they do call for a hearing. And once the committee calls it for a hearing, there can be, it can be either voted on whether it can come out or if it's just an informational hearing to get more data around it. So sometimes when you're thinking about longer legislation or bigger legislation that has a large impact on the budget or will be a cause an effect of, say, a lot of training for staff and things like that, they'll hold several committee hearings where folks can get all the details of what that would look like and how it would be implemented in the state. If it makes it out of committee, then it will go to the floor. And this is slightly different depending if you're talking the Senate or the House. Well, actually, it'll go to rules, which is another committee, and then the rules committee will vote it out. And then it'll go to the floor, in which it'll be presented to the legislators to vote on. You can follow that process after the bill is filed. So it has to be filed either through the clerk's office or the secretary's office at the Capitol. And once it's filed, it gets logged on to the appropriate websites, either house.georgia.gov or senate.georgia.gov. And then you can either look up the bill by the bill number, if you have it, the bill sponsor, if you know it, or also you can type in keywords, which can help you pull up the legislation. And when you click on the bill, it'll have a hyperlink and it'll show you exactly which process it's in. And during session, that's updated daily for you to look at. So here's an example of the website. As I mentioned, you could just type the bill number in here and hit search, or you can click this legislation search where you can search by different functions if you don't know the bill number. This is what it looks like on the Senate side. So same thing, you could type your bill number here, or you can click search legislation, which will open up a page with more filters for you to search for your bill and track it. If you're unsure where the bill is or what that step means, both chambers have office of staff that work for them that can answer any of your questions that you have. So for the House side, it's the clerk's office, and there is always a group of folks in there that can answer any of your questions about the status of the bill and what that means. And on the Senate side, it's the Secretary's office, which again, they can answer any question. You can also ask them for a printed version of your bill as well, if you're interested in having a printed version. Okay, so you heard me mention committees and the bill going through committees. So now we're just going to talk a little bit about what that means. So as I mentioned, after the first reader, the speaker or the lieutenant governor, they assign the bill to a committee. This is where the bill goes to live and have conversation and discussion on what it should look like. So I think the ideal process would, the ideal process, yeah, would be that during committee, you kind of flesh out the details. You figure out if there's any mistakes that were made when legislative council wrote the bill, or if there's any amendments that should be made, and you kind of flush that all out before it gets to the House. So that by the time it gets to the floor, you can still make amendments and change the bill, but ideally it's ready, it has a little discussion and ready to move to the next step. Resolutions, so that would be something like HR, SR. These don't have the force of law, so they don't have to go through committee. These are like claiming a House resolution could be today, November 11th, is now C4 Atlanta Day. So that would be an example of a resolution. It's something that is declared, but it has no force of law. If a bill is more complicated in the sense of it requires allocating funds or really changing a complete process, then it can go to a subcommittee for further work. So an example of this would be Appropriations Committee, which is the budget. But there's so many bills that involve the budget, and they're in all different areas that the Appropriations Committee then has subcommittees. So there's the subcommittee Appropriations Health, where they then look at specifically budget items that have to do with healthcare in Georgia. And so the nitty-gritty details will be kind of thought out in those subcommittees. Then it'll go to the regular committee, it'll be looked over one more time, and then hopefully voted out of committee to the floor, where all legislators will look at it and bring up any questions before it's voted on. As I mentioned, there are hearings that are held in the committees. The co-chair or the chair has the authority to decide if a hearing will be just informational or a vote will be taken. So if it's informational, it just means exactly that. You're getting facts, maybe making amendments, adjusting the bill as necessary, and then they'll come back after those amendments are made and vote. The committee will vote the bill out of the committee. Once it passes out, goes to the Rules Committee of the Senate or the House. Each chamber has the same steps, so they each have their own identified committees for it. It doesn't go to one general committee. Okay, currently there are 41 standing committees in the House and 26 standing committees in the Senate. This we kind of went over already. So like I mentioned, once it's read on the floor, then it's assigned to a committee, and the committee can choose to act on a bill or not. So the reason that we talk about committees so much in this training is the life of your bill can really depend on the committee and the committee chair. So it's important to know who sits on those committees and who the chairs of those committees are. And when you're thinking about your advocacy, making sure that you're reaching out to them and that you're informing them about your issue and why it's important. You can't just only rely on the sponsor of your bill to get your bill through. They will represent your bill through the process, but you want to make sure you're informing everyone and talking to all the appropriate people. You can find the schedule for committee meetings online in each chamber's website. So that same website where you can look up your bill, you can look up the committee meetings. This is very important to check this regularly because there are no set times for committee hearings. There is a general schedule. So you could say typically this committee meets every Wednesday at 5 p.m. But they don't have to do that. So if something comes up, the chair has the discretion to cancel a committee hearing or add a hearing last minute. So for example, if a bill comes that the chair really wants to get to the floor for a vote, they can call a quick committee hearing and vote on that bill and vote it out so that it can go to rules and be voted out to go to the floor. So they have room to change those meeting notices and meeting dates. So it's important to check on that regularly on the website. In normal time,
could I ask you just really quickly, so they can change the meetings when they want to, and so sometimes that happens too when people, is it true that sometimes that happens too when folks maybe you want to call a meeting early to because they know folks will show up for it, or they've changed the meeting room? I know sometimes those are tactics that we've heard about when there are really contentious policies kind of going through the General Assembly.
Yeah, of course. That is 100% true. I was trying to keep it more on the level, but that is true. So if it's an issue that is a hot button, they will change meeting rooms. They will change meeting times. So to make it a little bit more, it makes it more difficult for advocates to show up, right? So if you knew that an issue that you really cared about was being heard today at 4 p.m. and you gathered, let's just say 500 people down at the Capitol, and you waited there all day, but maybe it's an issue that they don't want to hear from all those 500 people at that time, they could just cancel the meeting. And then now as an advocate, it's up to you to decide, okay, so how do I mobilize those people, and how do we get them back there, right? Because during normal times, these meetings are happening during business hours. So not everyone can just take off a day of work to go to a meeting. And not everyone can take off multiple days to go to a meeting. So that's why we say to check it often. And pre-COVID, in all honesty, they won't even post updates often on the website. They have actually a bulletin board where they print out the new meeting dates and times and pin it up there. Obviously, I would hope that in these COVID times when they're going to have to be more digital, they'll be better about updating that. But we'll all be learning that in real time. So does that answer your question, Audrey? It does happen. It is a tactic, yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted I just wanted to acknowledge that, because that's something that I know folks and one of our goals is to connect artists to skills for advocacy beyond just the arts, and I know that is especially with some of the legislation that has been around reproductive rights, that has happened a lot, and so something just for advocates to be aware of, that it can even change the day of hours ahead of time, or the room can change, or all of these things. So you have to be on your toes.
Yeah, and I think another thing that can change. So during the committee meeting, the members will hear testimony. So basically, advocates can go and speak about the bill. But again, that's at the discretion of the committee chair. So as Audrey was mentioning, if it's an issue that's highly contested, which I mean often is reproductive justice, but I think even the voting rights is something that's very current right now and was happening at the same time as a larger reproductive justice legislation. They can decide that they don't want to hear from anyone at all during the meeting, so they might not take your testimony. They could decide they only want to hear from experts, and then they have the ability to decide who that is that they're allowing to sign up to speak and to testify. So sometimes they could also say, I only want to take, maybe 100 people showed up to speak, but they could also say, oh, I only want to take the top 3 people who signed up to speak, and then they can cut it off. So there's lots of different things that they can do to kind of shift the process the way that they see fit. That's why it's very important to be on the ball. Okay, here. So as I mentioned, whoever introduced the bill, they'll carry it all the way through. So they'll be representing the bill in the committee hearing. Often what you'll want to do as an advocate. So I think another thing that maybe I didn't mention that's important to mention is that legislators are not experts in every area. So oftentimes they have like niche things that they know a lot about, but they want to support all different things. So they're looking for people who are experts in that space who can help give them the information. So in this case, if you found a champion, say we'll just continue on with the voting rights example, somebody maybe they don't know much about it, but you do, you can support them and say, what do you need for your committee hearing? What facts do you need from me? Like, who do you need to testify? If you're thinking about a domestic violence issue, it's always really impactful to have somebody who's experienced the issue come and speak to the committee. So can you help your legislator, your champion, with those types of things? And then you yourself can testify, provide testimony on the bills if that's something that interests you. And just know that if you do provide testimony, they have the right to ask you questions. So if that scares you like it scares me, then just go in knowing that ahead of time.
Yes. What's a good way for folks to find out who, like, to reach out to maybe that legislator who's on the committee and say, like, I am an expert in this, or I can help you? Is there a good way for them to kind of connect with that person or figure out who that might be?
Yeah, I think the best way is, it's really important to research the legislators before you go to them, right? So I would go to the websites that were up before the Senate or the House and look up, when you click on the committee tab, it lists all the committees, and then you can look up who sits on those committees and then just click on them, and usually it'll show you what other committees they sit on, what bills they're sponsoring, and it'll have a little bio. So you can either identify the committee that your bill is in and then target all those members, or you can say, like, hey, I looked up Senator Oliver, I'm just going to use my own name, and I see here in her bio that she has a foster child, so foster care issues must be really important to her. I'm going to go and talk to her and see if she would want to take up this issue, because foster care is an issue I care about. Or I see that Senator Strickland, he goes to this art gallery every Saturday with his family. On his Twitter, he promotes that. So I think he might care about the arts issues. I'm going to go and talk to him and offer my expertise to him. You just have to do a little digging, light digging, to see what their interests are, and having that connection, and also remembering that they're people. So, you know, how do we feel when people come to us and just ask us for things without taking any interest in us, is the same way that legislators feel. And also make sure you're going to the appropriate person. It's always best if you're a constituent. That's like a golden ticket. But
if you aren't a constituent, like, can you bring somebody with you who is a constituent?
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's a good in. So I think you could leverage your network. So like the C4 network, and you could say, hey, this representative, I think, is the person that we need. Do any of y'all live in their district? And then work together like that. Does that answer your question, Audrey?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Are there any more questions before I move on?
I don't see any more questions right now.
Okay. Okay, so where did we leave off? So we talked about for a bill to get out of committee, it has to get majority of vote from the committee members. So like how I was just discussing with Audrey, that's why it's important to really make sure that all the committee members are on board and you've spoken to all of them. I think a really big piece of advocacy is education, right? Like I mentioned, legislators are not experts in many topics. And so oftentimes you're more of an expert than they are on the issue that you care about because you've spent a lot of time researching it, connecting with other folks in that area, or you've lived it yourself and you have that point of view that you can bring. So it's just really important to make sure that you're reaching out to everyone and covering all your bases so that you can get that majority vote. If it doesn't get majority vote, it can't come out of the committee. If it doesn't get a hearing, it can't come out of the committee. So effectively, your bill can die in the committee. If it comes out of the committee it was assigned to, with support, that's when it goes to the Rules Committee, which we spoke about. And then that's a whole nother list of people that you need to target as far as advocating for your policy. During session, they usually meet once a day. In the House, they meet in the morning before session starts, and in the Senate, they meet after session each day. They can also take breaks and meet to hold committee meetings to call out more bills to the floor. So whatever comes out of the Rules Committee, that helps to set the agenda for what the floor will vote on the following day. So if they've voted through a lot of issues, then they'll go back and call out more. Or if a committee was held and something big came out, they'll go back and call that out so that they can vote on it. And when your bill is in the Rules Committee, in the Senate side, the sponsor needs to find a Rules Committee member to essentially be its advocate in that meeting. So they have to call out and say, hey, I want this bill to come to the floor. They present it, and then a Rules Committee member will say, I want to pick this bill to come out. Yeah, does that make sense, that part? I know that's a little tricky, but somebody in that committee has to choose your bill to come out of the rules. Okay, once it's approved by the Rules Committee, then that's when it can go to the floor for a full vote. This again, it has another tricky step, right? So it doesn't automatically mean it'll go to the floor for a vote. The Speaker or the Lieutenant Governor picks what can be called for a vote for that day. So there will be a list of all the bills that are eligible for votes, and then the Speaker will decide the order and call out the bills that he wants to come up for a vote. So again, this can be another tactic for polarizing issues to not get voted on the floor. And then, so once it makes it to the floor, you've taken a break because you've found someone to sponsor it, you've gotten it out of the committee, you've found someone in the rules to get it out, it got it to the floor. Now you need to just convince the whole legislative body to vote for it, right? No big deal. That's the easy part. So that's when you would want, in regular times, you'd want to be down at the Capitol. You'd want to be calling whoever the legislators are to the ropes, literally like their movie theater sanctioned ropes that you have legislators come out and speak to you, and you say, this is my issue. This is why I want you to vote on it. Vote yes, or I don't like this issue and this is why you shouldn't vote on it, vote no. And you spend your day kind of working the ropes, calling people out, convincing them one way or the other. If you're successful in that and it gets called for a vote, it gets voted out as a yes, by crossover day, then it crosses over to the other chamber and you start the process all over again. So I think too, we have it here. Oh, it's coming up. This is a picture of people watching the vote from the gallery this is the House side. Yeah, this is the House. So this is really exciting. And if you are advocating for something and we're able to go down to the Capitol again in a regular world, I highly recommend that folks participate in this because it's so exciting to see, right? We just named all these steps, all these people you have to talk to, all this teaching you have to do to the committee or to the community. And I think there's nothing more exciting than going to the gallery and watching the legislators vote yes and seeing the names tick green, hopefully, if that's what you want, on this this board you see here has all the legislators' name, and as they vote it says yes or no. So it's so exciting to see them all come through and see how everyone's voting for your policy.
And if I could ask, Ashley,
Yeah.
one of the things that you know, we've noticed, I know with certain arts legislation, but I know this isn't just true of the arts, is that, you know, because it does take there's so many steps to get just to the vote piece of it, and so many people that you have to talk to and convince, that can be why, you know, you see these bills that take like years, you know, to get passed. Because is that true? Like it sometimes takes a lot more than just one legislative session to get some of these things to, just to get enough people to kind of put their eyes on it.
Yeah, that's 100% true. So advocacy it's about small changes, right? And I think that sometimes you'll get a really big, important win, but it's all about incremental change. So I think it's really important, and what I always tell people who are participating is you have to define what success is to you. So ultimately the success is to enact the policy, but as you mentioned, sometimes it can't happen overnight. So maybe the success is that, hey, before I was advocating, these legislators didn't even know what this arts issue was, but now they know what it is. They're thinking about it. They're talking about it. So that might be 1 year that you're doing that. And then the next year, hey, now that you know about it, let's come up with an idea to enact it. And then it can be especially difficult if you're talking about things that involve money, the budget, and things like that take a really long time. So that can definitely be part of the process. And I think another hard thing is we do start over every 2 years. So every 2 years, if you didn't get it, you've got to go through all those steps. In the in-between time, the bill stays wherever it was when the session ends. So in 2021, if you had a bill that was in a committee, it stays in committee until 2022. But if it never made it out of committee in 2022, it's just done. You have to start all over with getting it reintroduced. So you're kind of chasing this 2-year ball all the time. And it's short, right? So as I mentioned, you have to have your bill voted out of the floor as a yes by crossover day, which is the 28th legislative day of the 40-day session. So anything that hasn't made it out of the floor with a yes vote by that day is essentially finished for that session. There are, of course, exceptions to that. They can be added as amendments. There's all different tricks that folks can do to still work for it, but essentially, by all means, your bill is dead if it didn't cross over by that 28th legislative day. And then, as I mentioned, once it crosses over, you start the process all over again. Now, what needs to happen when it crosses over is whoever your sponsor was, hopefully they should have somebody in mind on the other side that carries the bill for them. So a lot of this work you would kind of be doing in tandem, right? So you would be doing it with hopes that your bill is going to cross over, and you'd be talking to the people on the other side saying, hey, I think you're going to be the sponsor for this bill on the Senate side. Here's the information so you can start talking about it and here's the committee I think it'll go to, so I'm going to start talking to the committee members and start educating them now. So even though you're starting over, a lot of this work would already kind of be in play. You'd already be informing them. What you don't want to do though is, if your bill is in the House, you don't want to focus so much on that bill on the Senate side, but you want to focus more on the education piece of that, if that makes sense, because the Senate's not going to care about that specific bill until the House passes it. But you can maybe start already informing them why that issue is important and why you want to see them supported if it crosses over. The thing is, once it crosses over, the committee and the legislators can amend that bill. So if they decide to amend the bill, then it has to go back to the other side and they have to approve those amendments. So you might see this a lot, like, I think the budget is a good example. So maybe like the amount of funds that were allocated, the Senate might say, hey, I think that's too much. I want to lower it to this amount. Or sometimes it can be something as simple as, I don't think that this wording matches our Georgia code, so we just need to change this wording to make it actually be legal. And then it has to go back to the House and they'll approve those amendments. So sometimes that can happen as well. I think if any of y'all followed the hate legislation this year, we saw that happen, right? So it changed several times in several committees and on the floor to accommodate what those legislators felt was most important. And then there was a constant back and forth until they came upon something that both chambers agreed on, and that the lieutenant governor and the speaker would both agree on. I think that's a good example of that. Conference committee, that's if changes are made that can't be fleshed out in a quick agree on the floor. So like I mentioned with the hate crimes bill, if there was a lot of contention around that bill, so the House did not agree with the changes that the Senate made, so they held a conference committee where they went back and like fleshed those details out. And that conference committee is specifically for that bill and how that they can come to compromise on the issue so that they both agree on the changes. Then once it passes out, it'll go back to the floor for an agree vote, that they agree on the changes, the amendments, and that the bill passes. And lastly, if you get the bill out, whew, this is a marathon, y'all, it's a marathon. If it's approved by both the chambers, it then goes to the governor for his consideration. So this is where if he signs it, he has 40 days to sign it, and then it becomes law. He can veto it, or he can just do nothing, and the bill will come in effect. And all of the laws become effective July 1st of that year. So this is again where it's important to know how people are feeling, key players, and things like that, because if something passes but it's not on the governor's agenda, he can veto it. So if it's somehow you had both the Senate and the House agree, but the governor doesn't, he can stop it from going through as well. I don't think that happens too often, though. It's usually pretty big things that he does that. Okay, so that's all the state level. Any questions about the state level before we talk about the local level legislation? It's going to be very similar, so.
No, I think one question I had was, you mentioned the lieutenant governor and the speaker. Does that, I mean, I'm sure most folks are probably familiar with how the U.S. House of the U.S. Senate runs with the vice president presiding along with the Senate Majority Leader. Is it similar in the state level and how that works, or are there any differences?
I think it's very similar. Alina, I don't know if you want to add in, but it's very similar. So the speaker and the lieutenant governor, they set the tone for how the body will vote, especially their party, and they decide what can come to the floor. And then they're tiebreakers in the case that a vote is up for a tie.
And I would say that they preside over each chamber. So the Speaker of the House presides over the House, the Lieutenant Governor presides over the Senate. So that's why she's referencing each of them. They are basically in charge of what happens on the floor, and in many ways behind the scenes in the House and the Senate.
Awesome. Any other questions? Cool. I don't see any questions in the chat.
I know it can seem complicated at first, y'all, but I promise, like, once you get your feet wet, you get in there, it becomes easy. I feel like on paper, it's very overwhelming, but once you start it, that's the key. You just got to jump in and you quickly pick up what's happening. So I hope y'all don't feel like, oh my gosh, this is so overwhelming. Don't let all the words scare you.
And I would add, Ashley, just that this is one of the reasons why it's important to create coalitions. It's a lot if you're trying to work as an individual to get through all these steps, track all this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So to the extent that you can cultivate a community of people who are like-minded and want to work on a piece of legislation and see it move forward, that's really helpful, because obviously you can split up some of these tasks, and then you really will, if you get to the point where you have a piece of legislation that's moving forward, you'll rely a lot on the member who's carrying the legislation. He or she will be able to provide you with really key insights. They'll give you some sort of direction, like you should be talking to this person or that person. So, you know, we're laying out all the steps that that actually have to be gone through, but working in coalition and working closely with a legislator who's moving a piece of legislation for you will be key to actually getting it done and keeping track of everything.
Yeah, and I think that just, you know, for us as artists, I think that just is a great reinforcement of why it's so important for us to build coalition with each other, and also to build cross-sector coalitions if there are issues that affect you know, just more than ourselves or more than us as individuals, but are, you know, are affecting other sectors. It's more power in numbers, right?
Yeah. Elena and Audrey hit it on the head. Like, it's going to be very rare that you're doing this all on your own, and it's almost impossible to do it on your own. You really have to have people helping you and watching you and taking over certain parts of it. So it's so important to build coalition. Excuse me. Okay, so we're just going to talk a little bit about the local level of legislation. It's very similar to the General Assembly in many ways, but just a much smaller scale. So not as many folks that you have to reach out to. They have committees, they have hearings, and they vote on the full legislature. So again, this is just going to be important. I think one big takeaway from this is you just have to know who's representing you so that you can talk to them and speak to them about the issues and hope that they can help carry those forward for you. So if you're in the Atlanta proper, we would suggest familiarizing yourself with the Atlanta City Council and the Fulton County Board of Commissioners. I live in Cobb County, so I know who my district leader is and who my Cobb County commissioners are. We've listed the website here for you to be able to log in and check, and then we have an example here. So this is the City Council website for Atlanta. If you click on council members, it'll be able to show you a list of who they are. And again, read up on them and see, you know, what are they interested in, what legislation are they bringing forward, or policies are they bringing forward. Here is the Fulton County Board of Commissioners. And I would also see, like, okay, do they look like me and the community that I live in, and are they representing us in the proper way? For local advocacy and tracking, again, very similar. So you use those same two websites, and then you can log on. You'll see here next to council members, you have legislation, you have standing committees, and you have the divisions of the council. So you'll be able to go on here, you'll be able to see what the city council is working on, what committees exist, and be able to track the legislation through them.
And we've highlighted Atlanta and Fulton County, but the same thing, as Ashley mentioned, she lives in Cobb. The same sort of principle applies wherever you live. Who's your local legislature? And there, you know, there may be some different form. And obviously at the local level, there will be different legislatures will be more or less advanced technologically. So they may have a website, hopefully they will in this day and age. If not, you can go down to your local city hall and figure out the process that might be a little bit more manual. But the point is that at your local level, there's some system that you can get involved in and become aware of and do the same sort of advocacy and tracking that you would at the state level, at the local level.
Yeah, and one note that I just wanted to mention that I realized we didn't mention is a lot of these things are live streamed. So I know Cobb County Commission meetings are live streamed. When the General Assembly is in, the floor is live streamed, and majority of committee hearings are live streamed. So if you're not able to go down and be there in person for COVID-related reasons or work-related reasons, you can watch them live, and they also keep video archives on those websites as well that you can watch. So just to talk a little bit about administrative action and the rulemaking process, we did note here, rulemaking is the process by which government agencies establish the rules for carrying out laws passed by the legislator. So this is a little bit different process. Here we have a breakdown of the two different ways that it can go through. One is administrative rulemaking and the other is legislative rulemaking. So is it going to go through the agency or is it going to go through the General Assembly to make those rules? The best way to track those is to sign up for updates, because these are things that are a little bit more in the weeds for a lot of people. So it's best to just sign up with the agency and see what they're saying and how they're administrating them. Join the mail list for we have here the Georgia Council for Arts. So if you join that mail list, you'll get their administrative updates. And then also another one that we would recommend to sign up for is the Georgia Department of Economic Development. So use the resources that are already given to you and rely on those to keep you abreast of what's going on and what to watch out for.
And just to add a little bit more on this, because it can get a little confusing, just the rulemaking, you'll hear rulemaking referred to as rules or regulations. And that's just the part where after a law gets passed, that's probably like the broadest sort of communication of what the government is supposed to do. And then at the agency level, they can drill down and give a little more detail through the rulemaking that they will put into effect. And sometimes those rules can have a bad or a negative impact, but you have the opportunity through this rulemaking process to give comments and keep the agency on track to what the vision was when a law gets passed. So it's kind of in the weeds, but it can be a really important part of making sure on that implementation side that things are being carried out in the way that you had envisioned when you were originally advocating for a policy or a law to go into effect.
Thank you. Here is a list of some things that you can sign up for. as we mentioned, and Audrey brought it up, Elena brought it up, things change very quickly, right? Meetings change, new laws come up, new ideas. So we really recommend signing up for anything that's key to you. Watch the local news, sign up for listservs for organizations that are doing the work that you believe in. We have ours listed here. Follow legislators, reporters and advocacy organizations on social media. The Georgia House and the Georgia Senate are both on Twitter, and they update those quicker than their website if you're following specific bills. So I would recommend following them on Twitter if you want to get live updates for committee hearing times and the status of a bill. There's also Lawmakers, which airs on PBS at 7 p.m. every night of the session. And then you can also go to the State of Georgia website or the Georgia General Assembly website. We made it. Any questions, Audrey? That's it. Y'all are experts now. Now you can just change Georgia.
That's the hope, right? Thank you so much. Any questions? If anyone wants to ask questions in the chat, or if you want to use the raise your hand feature, and we can call on you. If you have any questions, this is like warming my little West Wing government loving. Government like nerd loving. I will say that not always the policy measures, but certainly I have a love for understanding more about how government and civic engagement works. I put some of the links that you mentioned in the chat so that folks could just click on those and go through them. Are there any other maybe helpful links that you think folks might be interested in, or websites that you like to use maybe when you're trying to learn more about different issues?
I think that's all good.
It's on that last page, but I highly recommend Georgia Recorder, just for knowing what's happening around the state. They break stuff down really well, I think. And the AJC Politics blog is really helpful just for knowing what's going on at the Capitol. But I can't overemphasize just how, if you are digging in, obviously this is arts focused, so if you're digging in on arts questions, being really attuned to organizations who are focused in that space, so following them on social media, etc., is really important to knowing what's going on in the particular issue area that you're focused on.
Yeah, and you mentioned social media. Georgia Council for the Arts has a pretty good social media presence, and I know so Fulton County, the Mayor's Office of Cultural Affairs in Atlanta. So those are other places to kind of check into with your local policy agencies, the social media presence.
I think on a high, not on a specific area, if you like podcasts, Political Rewind is good too. They'll always give an update on what's going on in the session. That's going to be more of a general look of what's going on, but I'm a podcast person, so that is always helpful for me. And then also another thing that I did is you can set up your own Google Alerts too. So you can go into your Google account and set up an alert for things that are important to you. So for example, it could be like arts in Atlanta, just as a random example. And then you'll get at the end of each day, Google will send you different articles that mention that, so that you don't have to go surfing through everything yourself, because there's so much out there.
I also will say that it can be intimidating to think about, like, sometimes you think like, oh, they're an elected official, they don't want to talk to me, they're really busy, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's really important to know that lots of these folks are very accessible. When you reach out, they will reach back to you. So to Ashley's earlier point, just once you recognize that someone, and you may already know just from the work that you're doing, that a particular elected official is very much invested in the arts and cares about the arts or cares about whatever the issue is that you're trying to advocate on, just beginning to develop a relationship with those people through email. As Ashley said, during regular times, just going down to the Capitol and talking to them at the ropes, et cetera. You can get some traction in that way, and they'll think of you when these issues arise and may shoot you an email like, hey, this is happening, mobilize, guys. So just beginning to organically grow relationships in that way. I think you should feel free to reach out when you know someone cares about the issue you care about.
Yeah. There's a couple questions in the chat, and but before I get to those, I wanted to just add to that, because we're talking about state and local government, some of these folks are like even more accessible than you might think. For instance, my local state rep is like my neighbor just a few blocks down the road. So I think sometimes it helps to think about that as like, oh, this is my neighbor. I mean, they have to live in your district, you know? So, you know, Stacey Abrams is like, well known as she is now, you know, she lived in the Kirkwood Edgewood area. She still does. And so, you know, thinking of them as like your neighbor, I think kind of helps to kind of make it feel a little less stressful to go into their big fancy office.
As much as you want something from them, they want something from you. They want your support and the support of your friends and family and colleagues. So it benefits them to build the relationship with you as well.
Yeah, I was just going to also add, don't wait for, of course, have an issue, but I would recommend just building that relationship with your representatives just from the start, because they often don't hear from their constituents except for when it's this huge issue, right? So if you work on building that relationship, I know, like, of course, this is all pre-COVID, but I know some who would go and have coffee with constituents or just meet them. And then that way, when a big issue does arise, they're going to listen to you because you took the time to build those relationships. So I would really just recommend reaching out and saying, hey, I'm here and I'm watching you.
Yeah, I want to get to the questions that are in the chat. So Ella asked, I have a question. If you were to organize and create a petition to help pass a certain bill or advocate for certain change, how could you present that before them? So if you're advocating for a bill, you get the time before the vote to present your petition, but if you're petitioning to create or inspire a new bill, how would you present that?
So I'll take a first crack, and Ashley, add whatever insight you have. I would say that that's a place where you want to kind of have a target. So you have an issue and you want to think about, and through research, recognize who also cares about this issue. And that is where I would start in presenting, okay, so you care about the arts, I care about the arts. In fact, I want this change, and this 150 other people want this change. Can you introduce this bill for us, or let me let you know why this is important? So I would start the dialogue with someone who I'm targeting, who I think might care about it, to see what kind of traction we can build.
I think that's right. I think Alina covered it. That's what I would say. It's really about, you have to have the right people, the right fit to help move it forward. So I would take your petition to someone who also has that same interest and align with it. And then I would also, we've talked a lot about legislators, but I would also focus a lot on community, right? Like, who are other organizations that y'all can partner with to really build that momentum and help push it forward to build those coalitions.
And I would also say that sometimes if you're trying to research and you can't figure out who might be in alignment with you, starting with your elected officials in your district, even if it's not their wheelhouse, they can perhaps give you some tips on whose wheelhouse an issue might be in to help you figure out where to go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any other questions? We have about 15 minutes left, but I didn't see any other questions. So if there are no other questions, I want to just say thank you so much to Alina and Ashley. This was super informative. I think we mentioned in the chat, but I'll mention it out loud as well. We are live streaming, so that means that after this session, this will be saved on the C4 Atlanta page, and it will also be saved on the Civic Arts Summit page as well. So if you go to either one of those and you want to go back and rewatch things or kind of go back and write some of those links down, we tried to drop some of them in on Facebook as well as we were doing the presentation. So they should be in both places. But also after the summit, if you registered, we will send you those links to the videos afterwards, so you'll be able to review those too. Thank you so much. This was so informative. I thought I knew a lot, and I learned some things. And I think it's always good to review how all this stuff travels, because it's so complicated. And yet it's like the bureaucracy of government is like horror. I don't know. It's like horrible and beautiful at the same time, right?
Once you master it, you can really get some stuff done. So it's worth taking the time to figure it out. So thank you guys for having us. You see our email addresses. Feel free to reach out if any other questions arise, or if as you're advocating down the line, questions arise, feel free, please.
And you all mentioned the Georgia Women's Policy Institute, but I want to just take another minute to mention that and get the link for that, because I think we've known some artists who've gone through that program who were addressing policy in their work, and I think it's a great introduction if that's something that's interested to you. So what is the website for that, in case folks want to learn more about that program?
It's just ywcaatlanta.org/GWPI. And we will open recruitment for next year in the spring of 21.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we have about 10 minutes left, so everyone can have 10 minutes back of their day. I want to remind everyone that we start tomorrow morning with another session. New Georgia Project will be with us at 10:30 tomorrow morning. Nsé Ufot, who is the executive director of New Georgia Project, will be talking about grassroots organizing and messaging for quick mobilization. So I'm super excited. They are a huge reason why everyone is talking about Georgia right now, because they are incredible at grassroots organizing and messaging. And then tomorrow afternoon, we have PEN America, Nora Benavides, who's the director of free expression for PEN America, will be talking about some of the potential outcomes after this election, some of the different effects on government that could be happening, and then the opportunities to advocate within transitional government as governments are changing. Where are there ways to kind of get on the radar with folks as a new administration is coming in? So super duper excited about that. Please join us tomorrow, and we will see you all then. Thank you so much again. Take care. Have a great day.
Take care.